Okay, we're starting viewing the railroad at the east end of the freight classification yard. Moving towards the west, one of the things we'll see on the far side of the yard there is my scale and test car facility. That was something I presented to you a couple sessions ago in one of the general meeting, information about some of the projects I've done. Just behind the scale, you'll see a complete line of refrigerator cars, and they are on the dedicated refrigerator car staging track, and it leads to an icing facility. The yard branches out here, 2 tracks down the center considered arrival and departure tracks, and storage tracks for about 250 freight cars. Looking closely, you might see some of the cars I've highlighted in a couple of presentations about my projects. The far side of the yard right now, there's an icing plant and an ice dock to take care of the ice bunker refrigerator cars. And coming down at the bottom now, there's the control panel. This is still a pure, straight DC railroad. I've got double track main line labeled east and west because typically that's what they are. They have 4 independent blocks on each one, controllable by the toggle switches. Each end of the yard is individually controlled for power source with those rotary switches, so they can be powered from either end of the cab controls or the mainline power packs. And a little further in the lower left corner of the control panel is the schematic for the engine service facility, which we'll see in a minute. Independently controlled tracks and blocks in there. Looking back up across the yard, or coming up, you can see the front side of a Santa Fe 1-story depot, which we'll take another look at on the outside view. And we're approaching the west end of the rail yard next, after the depot. The depot is in a fictional town in New Mexico called Cahoots. So the joke becomes, have you ever been in Cahoots? Now entering from the left is the diesel service facility. We've got 2 fueling and sanding tracks, and you can see the prominent sand reservoirs, and 5 other locomotive storage tracks. And in the background, there's some associated buildings you'd find with most any kind of a yard facility. There's the oil bunker there that feeds the oil cranes on this fueling track. And that white tank car on stilts, that's where the sand is stored that goes through the sanders. And then moves around to the west entrance or exit from the yard, and onto a double track main line, and there is a crossover to facilitate in and out of each track to the yard. And what is, I consider, the upper level now starts a descent down to the lower level. The basic overall track plan, if you can envision it, is a figure 8 folded back over itself. So if you stand in one spot, you'll actually see a train go by twice, once on each level, before it gets back to its starting point. And the near view is what becomes the lower level. That's a downgrade. The one you're looking at in the back is also a downgrade. Or if you're coming the other direction, it's an upgrade. Railroad was designed to be kind of self-sufficient for my purposes. I can operate classification yard, and I can have 1 or 2 trains out running on the main line. They pretty much take care of themselves as they make their circuits around. Occasionally I'll switch tracks on them, or send a train out of the classification yard or bring one in, kind of just on a whim of what I feel like doing. Coming into view from the left is the one industry or function on the railroad. It's a mine. I've got some hopper cars staged for loading there now. Every once in a while I switch them out with loaded hopper cars just to change the view. And just to the left of the big mine structure is a little one that I say in the history of the mine was where they started, and then they got bigger and built a newer facility, bigger facility. The rails in the back disappear underneath into a tunnel at this point, and they'll run parallel and underneath the upper level tracks. And here's a crossover that allows switching between main lines or facilitates entrance and exit into the yard from either of the two main lines. The terrain represents the desert Southwest, and fictionally, again, it's somewhere in New Mexico, I say, perhaps between Clovis and Belen, New Mexico. I frankly admit I'm not the greatest scenery guy in the world, so I went the path of least resistance here probably. And we're returning where we started, back to the east end of the classification yard. All right, picking up again, we've switched from the inside of the railroad to the outside. We're at the east end of the classification yard. And we're seeing both the upper and we see a tunnel exit where the tracks that entered on the backside come out. And after a short run, it enters another tunnel. With the upper level running out in the open at this point. Here's the other side of the tunnel we just entered. On the other side of the stairway, it goes underneath the stairway in the house. Passes by a golf course. You can tell by the contrast in the features there, it has to be well irrigated to get that much green out here in the desert. And then just shifting to the upper level again, we can see the other side of the icing facility for the ice bunker refrigerator cars. And moving further to the right, we'll soon see the other side of the one-story depot that sits out here in the middle of nowhere near a town. Follow the road out to get to the town. It's got a semaphore train order signal, a few vehicles. There's some people as if they're waiting for a train. The upper track, as we geographically move to the west, the lower track once again is going to enter another tunnel, and it will also be under the upper level of the railroad, paralleling it. Overall dimensions for the railroad, it's about 34 feet in its longest dimension and about 18 feet in its widest dimension. But as you can see, it's open in the middle, and that's where I operated from. Coming along to the other side of the engine service facility, you can get a different angle view of it. The locomotives stored there being serviced, the caboose track. And we are at the west end of the rail yard, the classification yard again.